Ladies and gentlemen, as we may know, humanity is coming to the terms with COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. Analysts predict a huge economic shock after the lockdown is lifted. Some even compare current crisis to the Great Depression started by Black Thursday in 1929 financial crash. Is our current situation really that bad? In my speech, I will try to examine situation during the Great Depression of 1930s and the Great Recession of 2008. Then, I compare them as much as possible to our current situation. For that purpose, I will rely on a few charts and historical facts. So I would like to start from my first chart, and on that chart we can see that unemployment rate in the USA, in the country, which was quite good representation of what was going on in the capitalist world at the time. I would like to focus on this data especially from this chart. What we can see here is enormous spike in unemployment between 1930 and 1932 especially. The data that we can see here corresponds to real-life events when all major industries of that time were really badly affected. Did you know that back then, I think it was 1931, the United States, by the skin of the teeth, avoided becoming totalitarian state? Then we can see sudden decline of the unemployment in 1933 onwards. It's all down to President Roosevelt's New Deal policy being implemented. The whole idea of that policy was based on the philosophy of state interventionism, which in practice means that if the economy is too weak to cope with certain conditions, then the state, using taxpayers' money and its fiscal power, steps in to save the day. Unfortunately, not all developed economies affected by the Great Depression managed to avoid the menace of dictatorship. Germany is the best example that most of us know. In 1933, because of the Great Depression, Adolf Hitler got to power and started building totalitarian state. He found so-called quick fix to get the country out of depression. He militarized the country and started preparing for war. His actions did not go unnoticed, and other countries started following the same path. As we can see it on our chart, even the USA was forced to scale up military production. That's why what we can see here, this resulted in real and significant drop in the unemployment. We all know what happened next. Are we destined to repeat the same scenario in our times? Not necessarily. Although yes, between 1933 and 1945 brought a lot of poverty, misery, death, and destruction on massive scale, never seen before, they also brought a lot of technological progress and made such inventions like commercial airlines, space travels, computers, and mobile phone networks possible. Additionally, emergence of nuclear powers and development of weapons of mass destruction caused the world to avoid any further global conflicts. Furthermore, progress of mankind and consecutive technological revolutions made any financial crisis less acute. A good illustration of that is the Great Recession that started in 2008. It has been presented on our next three charts. The charts cover the following areas: GDP, investment, and consumption, both in the US and in the G20 countries excluding US. What we can clearly see is that the impact of the Great Recession was the most acute in the first quarter of 2008 and the first quarter in 2010. That gives us just 2 years of the economic downturn that was not really as acute as the Great Depression of 1930s. We need to admit that back in 2008, during the recession, G20 governments made a series of decisions that helped to avoid escalation of the credit crunch. Those decisions were made only because the USA and the other G20 member states learned lessons from the mistake made in 1930s, the mistake that led to Great Depression. As a part of lessons learned, those states took following measures. Firstly, they implemented quantitative easing, as well as huge bailout programs that provided guarantees of stability and security to the global financial systems. Apart from that, AI was introduced to manage the markets around the world, and it played a role in balancing the markets all over the world as well. Therefore, as we can see in our three charts, overheated economy could have corrected itself and returned to sustained growth around second or third quarter of 2009. Additionally, many governments of the G20 group initially introduced generous social security programs that were scaled back in the following years. As a result of those actions mentioned, the outcome of the Great Recession of 2008, which we'll have to probably rename because of the current recession, the outcome of that recession in 2008 was not as dreadful as financial world expected it to be on its onset. However, there is one stark difference that brings our current situation closer to the one from the time of Great Depression. If we look at our first chart again, it allows to understand it better. What we can see is representations of unemployment rate between 1930 and 1945. And one of the reasons why unemployment was spiking was because many countries used so-called beggar thy neighbor policy, which de facto stops or significantly limits international trade, and that in turn reduces any economic activity. That is why what you can see between year 1930 and 1933 is spiking unemployment. Unfortunately, something similar happened during the current COVID-19 pandemic, as data from many countries in the world show. We learned from them that because any economic activity in the world was stopped or significantly reduced, the world is going to face acute recession, more significant than one in 2008. For instance, one company released the data showing that PMI, Purchasing Managers Index, was the lowest ever. This sentiment is partially echoed by the data released by the Bank of England, which predicts an enormous fall in GDP of minus 14%. Yet, at the same time, this scenario brings glimmer of hope, predicting sharp rebound plus 15% of GDP in 2021. All of this is mainly due to the furlough scheme. Let us hope that these predictions will prove to be accurate. There is also another benefit that we may come out of the current COVID-19 situation. It may speed up the digital revolution significantly and change working models as more and more people are forced to use computers and rely on them. It may also mean that significant numbers of meetings or even conferences will be held online. So, to sum up, although current situation resembles the most the one from 1930s, firstly, it does not have to have the same outcome. And on the contrary, it may lead to the significant acceleration of the digital revolution and technological development, as did the Great Recession of 2008 and the Great Depression before. Thank you for your attention.